All right, welcome everybody to the 211th episode of our Minnesota Outdoor Skills and Stewardship Series. I can't believe we've done 211 of these, and I'm here with Jen Furtner today talking. She's a hatchery supervisor down here at Warner Road. Um, is Warner Road one of our oldest hatcheries in the system?
Yep. So the hatchery here we call the St. Paul State Fish Hatchery. That's not been its name for its entire existence. It was originally known as Willowbrook, and that was the name it was given when it was founded in the 1860s. So this is actually the oldest hatchery within our system. And yeah, we've been operational for 150 plus years raising fish for the state.
It's pretty amazing, wasn't Minnesota founded in like 1858? So we're only 2 years after the state founding.
It was the late 1860s, so
Okay.
10 years. About.
That's pretty amazing. So it's been here for quite a while. So we were talking, Commissioner Stroman was on the news yesterday talking about the $4.4 billion industry that fishing is in Minnesota. What role do our hatcheries play in that? What's the importance of having these hatcheries across the state?
Yeah. So within Minnesota, the main goal of our state-run hatcheries is to produce fish to create and perpetuate fishing opportunities within the state. So a lot of my funding comes from license sales. And so we're putting that money back into the system, basically. So it's kind of like a feedback loop. People fish more, buy more licenses. We, can have more money for production, and we put all that money back into making those opportunities.
It's pretty awesome. At the St. Paul State Fish Hatchery we're at down here today, what do you guys do for eggs and what do you raise down here?
Yep. So I am currently raising 3 species of fish. Over the many years that this hatchery has been operational, we've raised a whole variety of species. Back when we were first founded in the 1800s, we were doing Atlantic salmon. You don't do Atlantic salmon in Minnesota anymore. They're not native. We're not stocking them out. So our goals and objectives as an agency have changed over time. And right now I am raising walleye, muskie, and tiger muskie.
And speaking of walleye, this is the weekend of the walleye, right? It's the Governor's Fishing Opening this weekend. I'm super excited. It's up in Cross Lake. I'll be heading up there tomorrow morning to participate in that and do a little media broadcast from up there and do some fun stuff. But it's a state fish opener. It's a big deal in Minnesota. I think we might be one of the only states that actually have a governor's opener. So it's a lot of fun. It's also Mother's Day weekend, so I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Minnesota Moms Fishing Challenge, which is always fun. So go on our website. Amber can probably put a link to that in the chat. But go on there, register for that Minnesota Moms Fishing Challenge. And if you catch a fish, put a picture of that on our website. You'll be entered into some fun prizes that's sponsored by Women Anglers of Minnesota and the Student Angling Association Minnesota. It's always kind of fun.
Is there a prize for most fish caught? Because I can go and net about, 10,000 right now.
I was just going to ask you that. So I pulled up here this morning a few hours ago, and there's a couple trucks sitting out there, and they're loading up the back of a tank in the back of a pickup truck. There's a couple other water trucks. I don't even know if those are related, but you're saying it was kind of a small batch that went out today. So what was going on this morning? What are you stocking? What are you sending out, and how many of them?
Yep. So this morning we did the very last of the walleye fry stocking that we will be doing from my hatchery this year. And yes, it was a relatively small number of fish being pushed out the door today. It was about 200,000 walleye fry.
That's it, just 200,000.
Just 200,000.
So it's a small little batch. So,
yep.
When you say fry, what are you talking about?
Yep. So fry are what we call basically the very, very youngest fish, like freshly hatched. They're incredibly small. Walleye fry are, probably about 8 millimeters long, maybe 7, 6. So, they're probably total length is about the length of your pinky nail.
Oh yeah, pinky nail size. So we're going to show you some eggs here in just a couple of minutes, but they come out of the egg and they have a yolk sac attached to them, right? That they feed off of.
Yes. Yep. So a lot of fish, when they hatch, aren't going to be wild feeding right away. They have a yolk sac, which is, it makes them look like really cute and round, almost like a kitten with like a big milk belly after they've had, a nice meal, but it's not milk. The fry are not pregnant. That's their nutrition for the first few days of life. So that yolk sac will be providing them with nourishment. And then once they fully absorb the yolk sac, that's when the fish need to start feeding in the wild.
The question from Josh, it said, how big are the fish in the hatchery? So we were just talking about fry, kind of the smallest thing that we raise and send out. What are the varieties? How big do they get?
Yep. So the walleye, we ship out the door pretty much right away after they hatch. So they don't get much bigger than that pinky nail length that I was talking about just a moment ago. We've decided that as a state, we don't really need to raise them for very long in the hatchery. We can just send them out. So that's as big as they get here. The muskie I will keep for a little bit longer, and I will grow them to a slightly larger size. It's about 2.5 inches, but my target is actually not the length, it's the weight. So when a muskie is 2.5 inches long, each fish weighs about 1 gram.
Right.
So,
and then do you release them at that length, or do you send them out? I remember having a conversation with former chief of fisheries, Don Pereira, and talking about the difference between releasing fry, or do we keep them to fingerlings, which, as it sounds, is kind of finger length. I'm not for sure. How old is a finger length walleye?
A finger length walleye, and finger length is extremely variable. I have very small fingers, so that would be much less time than somebody with a larger hand. But what we're doing with a lot of our fish when we're stocking them out, some of them we're stocking directly into what are fisheries, fishing lakes. And those will just, hopefully grow and persist and get to a size, and people will be able to go and catch those directly from that lake. But for a lot of the fish, we are stocking them kind of into an intermediary pond. We call those, rearing ponds or holding ponds. And those are places that we've identified that they have a really high chance to persist. Some of them are, we have even more control over than just a pond that might work out. They're more like the hatchery ponds that you would see if you went down to some of our bigger hatcheries. And in those, we'll grow them out for a little while longer. The walleye that we release that left the hatchery just in the past few weeks will be taken out of our rearing ponds in the fall. And we will also do the same with some of our muskie, but we're starting to transition our muskie program into holding those muskie for longer, growing them out to be a little bit bigger, because we've found that if we can get just a few more inches on those muskie, they have a lot higher chance of survival in the wild.
That's cool. There's like a whole science behind this that I'm not super familiar with. Like, I guess the viability of eggs to fry, and then fingerlings, and then anything larger than that. And we talked the other day about, you guys take muskie, and you do tiger muskie here also, right?
Yes.
So, and you take both of those species and you raise them, like overwinter them someplace, and then release them as they're bigger for better viability in the natural system.
Yep. So we don't raise any of the tiger muskie. I have eggs right now, and then they will hatch. And once they're done feeding off that yolk sac, we actually sell them to private vendors. And we do buy some of the tiger muskie back in the fall. One of the nice things about tiger muskie is that they grow really fast. So you can get a really good size, probably, somewhere between 12 and 14 inches on a tiger muskie by the fall. They grow so quickly.
Wow.
But yes, the muskie, we were releasing them before, or currently we're kind of in the transitionary period to a larger size, but we released them at about 11 inches. And we've found that an 11-inch muskie has a survival rate of around 10%. But if we can get even them up just to 14 inches, which is, doesn't seem like a lot, their survivorship increases to about half. Which is a crazy high jump.
Yeah. Just in a couple inches. That's pretty amazing.
Yep.
So, Jason, he missed the beginning of it. We are at the St. Paul State Hatchery here in St. Paul, Minnesota, one of the oldest hatcheries in the system. It brings up another point. How many hatcheries do we have across the state of Minnesota?
Yep. So we have 15 hatcheries.
Wow.
We have what I call the 4 big hatcheries. Those are the cold water hatcheries. They are operational year round. 3 are in the south and 1 is up north. And then we have 11 hatcheries that are operational for varying amounts of time during the year. Maybe a few months up to 8 to 10 months or so.
Okay. And what type of species do we raise in all these hatcheries? I know we have some trout, walleye, we talked about muskies already.
Oh yeah, we're doing all sorts of species, and not even within species, we're doing different genetic strains. So different genetics of species. So there are quite a few, but we've got some pike program. We do some warm water fish. We'll also sometimes bring in fish from other places. So I actually don't have the number of how many different species and strains that we're doing, but we're always kind of moving around and shifting and checking out what we can do.
I know one of the programs we're looking at, well, we talked to Melissa Wagner about a year ago about I think it's called the Minnesota brook trout strain.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Craig Sapur is going to join us this summer and talk about the walleye strain. This is, and you mentioned at the beginning of the program about Atlantic salmon we used to raise in Minnesota. So there's a lot of fish that aren't native here that we have done stuff in the past. But
Right.
what's the important part of getting that genetic strain that's real localized to Minnesota and our waters around here?
For sure. Yeah. So that brook trout strain is called the driftless brook trout strain. They're working really hard, especially, down at Peterson, to promote that genetic strain. And that's just one that's native kind of to the driftless region of the South. They actually brought some driftless, really tiny baby trout to the state fair last year, and they were gorgeous. They looked different.
They're beautiful fish.
From you would think of as a regular brook trout. They have a distinct morphology. And then what Craig Sapir, I'm assuming, will be coming on and talking about is the lower Mississippi strain of walleye. So these are walleye that are historically native to the southern part of the state. In times past, and this isn't unique to Minnesota, all over the U.S. There was many stocking regimes where you were kind of just taking fish and just throwing them everywhere willy-nilly, not really considering what is native to a specific area.
I heard a really great story about this once. Is they used to load up trains with fish, and then when they went over the train trestle over a creek, oh, that looks like a good spot, and they would just stock off the train right into the water.
Yes.
In these different areas, so fish spread all over the place by that.
I might have told you that story actually, because so some of the historic stocking regimes were just box cars full of fish that as the train would just drive or ride the tracks, some people would be in the cars and just be throwing fish from the sides into waters and stocking them that way. And then in more relatively recent times, we started to pause and think, like, what is the impacts of stocking all of these different fish in different areas? What long-term impacts are we going to be having? Because we've realized that over the thousands and thousands of years that fish have been in a specific area, they've evolved to do well there. Yeah. So the reason that we're really starting to try to promote something like the lower Mississippi strain of walleye, again native to the southern part of the state, is because we found that fish with those genetics, when we stock them into those southern lakes, tend to do better than if we were to take walleye genetics from up north and bring them down, which intuitively makes sense, because if you think of a southern Minnesota lake in your mind and then compare it to the northern Minnesota lake, they look and behave quite differently.
That's awesome. I always like to point out for any of the youth listening too that this isn't like a set science, and it hasn't been 100 years ago. The science was different, and the stuff we did was different. So we're always learning. We're always changing stuff, trying to make it better and being more appropriate for our environment and our local stuff. So stay in school, study science, because it's really cool, and you can make some really cool breakthroughs sometime in your future. So,
yeah.
I'm going to turn the camera just a little bit. You have these big tanks right behind you. Can you talk a little bit about what we're looking at back here?
Yes. So these are what we call the mega tanks, or the vats. I like saying vats because it's just faster. And these are what we use for one of the parts of our muskie rearing. So like I said earlier, we keep the muskie for longer. And then the eggs that Benji was talking about, we're going to be seeing shortly, are muskie eggs. But they're in a jar right now. And, as muskie get bigger, they really don't fit in jars like that. So they need to go into progressively larger tanks. So right now the muskie are in jars. They're starting to hatch now, which is very exciting. But then once they really fully hatch, I will put them into smaller tanks, which are called mini troughs. They're not quite as big as the ones that we're seeing right now. And then they will spend the first 7 to 10 days in those mini troughs. And then they go into these tanks after that. But we put buckets in the tanks because the fish aren't quite big enough at that size to be able to withstand the full flow in the vat. And then they spend about 2 weeks in the buckets. And then we drop the buckets out once they're big enough.
That's awesome. I'm going to walk over to the egg things. You'll have to take the microphone with you, but I'm going to bring the camera over there so they can they can see what we're talking about.
Okay.
But we'll talk about the egg tanks over here.
Yeah. So we're going to go see some musky eggs. Benji is going live. Perfect. So we've got right now, Benji is showing the eggs that we just got a few days ago. They were spawned on the 3rd. And they've got this really pretty gold color. I get asked a lot about why some of them are gold and some of them are white. So the white ones are inviable eggs. For whatever reason, they didn't get fertilized. And so they're, actually, those are the dead ones. And as the process continues of them developing, we will start to pull the dead ones out. And then we're left with, hopefully just mostly healthy eggs. And then throughout the development, their color will change and they'll get a little darker. And now Benji will pan over to the darker colored eggs. These ones are the ones that are about to hatch or are starting to hatch. So you can see that that color gets a lot darker. I don't know if the detail is really showing very well, but you can start to see like a little black line in each egg. That's actually the spine of the fish. Benji, do you see, can you twist that spout right there, the little plastic piece, and then hold the camera on the jar and you'll see them. Yes. If you spin that, you should see some fish start to move. Do you see them? I don't know if they're showing up on the camera, but so they're starting to hatch in there. And so once the hatch really breaks and most of them are hatching is when we will move them to those smaller troughs and out of the jars. Yep. Yeah, that's what I was trying to get you to do, was agitate them so they swim. There we go. They're about to enter my favorite life stage in the hatchery. So muskie have a yolk sac just like walleye, but they don't absorb it within 48 hours. It's they have 7 to 10 days to absorb it, and during those 7 to 10 days, they just lie on the bottom of the tank doing absolutely nothing. They're just laying on their sides. Unless I disturb the water, they do nothing for 7 to 10 days. And I'm like, that's honestly mood. I feel that.
I know we had somebody ask about how many fish are raised in the hatcheries. I don't know how many are here, or do you know how many statewide also?
Total numbers of all species statewide, I do not know. But I do know that we are working on our 2026 and 2027 fisheries goals for the agency. And we are going to be trying to harvest 330 million walleye eggs for the entire state to distribute within all of our areas for both of those years. Each year we'll get 330 million eggs.
That's a lot of eggs. So, oh, yep, I can turn that so you're back on camera. So how do you get the eggs? Where do you find them? It's not like we go to the grocery store or Quick Trip and buy a dozen eggs.
That would be very easy. And I'm sure that would make our production supervisor, Paula, very happy, because she does a lot of the coordinating. So the entire egg take process begins much earlier than the actual taking of the eggs. So how it works is we have all of these area offices throughout the state, and the area supervisors know which lakes in their areas would be best for a walleye fishery or a muskie fishery or trout. And they talk to Paula every year and they say, Paula, I want to put this many fish in this lake. Paula gets that information from every area in the state, puts it all together, and makes one really, really big plan. And she's like, okay, I know how many fish that I need. And so then she distributes that information back to the people who are going to be taking eggs. We've got many different egg takes across the state for all the different species. Again, some of that, to make sure that we're reinforcing the genetics that we want. So we can't just have one walleye egg take, because we've got how many, 3 or 4 different genetic strains of walleye that we're working with, maybe a few more.
Wow.
And so those employees will be going out and collecting those eggs. And it is very intense work, many long days. You can collect the fish with nets, or sometimes they'll do night electrofishing too, but we'll collect the fish, and then you'll spend the whole day spawning the eggs and then either giving them directly to, the hatcheries, or putting them in a holding for the hatcheries to come get later.
So let's talk about numbers here a little bit. One of the questions David asked on here was how many fish are in each jar? How many eggs, I guess, are in each of those jars that we just showed?
So I have been cleaning the eggs periodically as they've been coming through. If I don't clean them, those dead eggs will start to infect good ones. So I go through every day, every other day, and I'll, pull off some of those dead eggs. So at the start, that very first jar had maybe 60,000 eggs in it, but that number's gone down. It was about 80% viability. So do some math. 80% of 60,000 is about how much is in there now.
Just highlighting those jars. So you said about how many thousands are each of those?
Let's see. That very lowest jar that one's only about 5,000. But like this really tall jar would be these two closest ones in the video those ones are probably about 50 to 60,000 right now.
And then how many eggs do you get from a fish? You're out there getting eggs from a walleye.
Right. Walleye, we have this really nice way of knowing it's about 1,000 eggs per pound of fish. Muskie, a really nice hefty female, can make I guess all of those lots each lot is one female. So each jar or each pair of jars, some of the females make a lot of eggs. So like one female is making 60,000 eggs.
Wow. It's a lot of it's a numbers game, right?
Yep.
We talked about the survival rate of some of the fry and the fingerlings that were out there, and the muskies going from 11 inches, like 10% survival rate, up to, you said 50 inches, or about 50% at 14 inches.
Yes.
So it's a numbers game.
It really is.
When you get released, and I used to run the Trout in the Classroom program, and I found it highly entertaining. Some of the students did not, but we're releasing trout. I think we're at Courthouse Pond over in Chaska, releasing trout into the pond over there, and something came out from underneath and ate little Toby. I think the fish's name is Toby. You can name their fish, but I tell them not to do. But
right,
I'm like, that's the life cycle of fishing, right?
It is.
We're raising these fish for, other fish are going to eat them. There's other critters are going to eat them. There's birds that are going to eat them. There's people that are going to catch them. So it's a numbers game.
It really is. Yeah. And that's one of the goals of a hatchery, foundationally, is we can take some of those natural elements away. So, the probability that an egg makes it to hatch in the wild is very, very low. Just a few percent maybe.
Yeah.
But like I said before, I'm getting 80% viability. So, about 80% are hatching. It's a very marked difference. Of course, at some point we're releasing these fish back into the wild. And at that point, if we're kind of, saying we've done what we can, it's up to you, fish.
Yep. School up and have fun.
Yeah.
So, Sabrina was asking, like, how do you decide? So we raise all these fish. How do we decide where we're going to release them all?
Yep. So a lot of people ask me where I've decided they're going to go, which is actually not what I'm doing. I'm just told to make them. So that's what I do. The decision is based on the area offices. So like I said earlier, they know which lakes in their area are going to be best for any one type of fishery. And so they're making the choice on, like, this lake is a good walleye lake or has the potential to be a really good walleye lake. And I know, or that area office knows that there's demand for a walleye fishery. So they're the ones who make that decision. And then they come to the hatcheries and we make the fish.
I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you
Yes.
know off the top of your head how many lakes we manage in the state of Minnesota?
No. Do you have a number?
I think it's upstairs in the bulletin board. I think it's like 5,700 lakes or something. There's a lot of lakes.
Oh, yeah.
That we manage as a DNR for everybody across the state and out of state to come here and fish.
Mm-hmm.
And each of those lakes gets surveyed, not every year, but every so often they survey them and decide, well, this lake's doing really well in walleye, or it's doing well in pike, or whatever. And that's kind of reflects our stocking.
Yep.
So, John asked a question about who's presenting. This is Jen Furtner, our supervisor down here at the Warner Road Hatchery, the St. Paul State Fish Hatchery. And Mark was wondering, do you conduct tours at any of the hatcheries?
Yes, we do. You can certainly come see mine. Mine is a little bit smaller and only seasonally operational. So I have fish in-house. So I say usually from April to July. I tell people like, like confidently, if you want to come and see a fish, come in June because when I get eggs and when they're hatching is really dependent on Mother Nature. I have no control over that. But if you want an opportunity to see a bigger hatchery, see some bigger fish, some of our brood stock fish, I would recommend checking out one of our cold water hatcheries. So again, like I said earlier, we have 3 down in the south, Lanesboro, Peterson, and Crystal Springs, and then 1 up north in Spire Valley. And they're wonderful hatcheries manned by wonderful staff. So call them up, check them out.
They're actually a lot of fun. I've toured a few of them.
Oh, yeah.
I know Waterville down there just had part of the Get Out More funding.
Oh, yeah.
Just doing a big revamp down there to update the facilities and update that. And I know we've talked a little bit the other day when I was down here about the possibility of updating the St. Paul hatchery here. So do you want to talk about that a little bit, what the infrastructure is like and what you might hope to do?
Yeah. So the hatchery here last had a major upgrade in the late 80s. So the hatchery as it stands now is older than me.
Thanks for not making me ask that question. By the way.
Hatcheries are a unique type of facility in that we're always working with and around water. It's integral to the production of fish. But on the other hand, it makes our facilities deteriorate a little bit more rapidly than, like a regular sort of office building because, give water enough time and it's going to carve a Grand Canyon. We're not, doing anything quite as grand as that, but, certainly things start to degrade after a while in a hatchery and, about 20 to 30 years is about how long a hatchery can usually go without needing a major facelift. So here we are, at that point. There is currently a request for funding that is being put through the legislature. We're working with MinFish, which is an advocacy group for anglers, to hopefully put that money through. And that money would actually not necessarily it wouldn't go directly to renovation. We are at a very early stage right now where that money would actually be going to help us determine what we can and should be doing to improve this facility. Because there's so many things in here, so many moving parts, so many machines at like different stages of their life that we almost need to just sit down and say, what's going on? What do we want in the future? And how do we get there?
Yeah, all this plays into, like I said before, this, $4.4 billion fishing industry in Minnesota. It all comes down to having the fish that draw people in here. So I'm going to pan a little bit. We talked about these tanks behind us and, the plumbing that comes in here. There's a bunch of more jars on this side that you can fill up with eggs.
Yes.
If you need them and whatnot. And all that takes a lot of water too. So all these hatcheries are located at a place that do we get well water here? Is it spring fed?
I do get well water here. So the hatchery here has actually been on this site since it was founded in the 1860s. And it was originally chosen because we get water off of the bluffs. We're kind of located right underneath the bluffs. There are some springs that come through. And so that was initially why this site was chosen. But now I do get well water, which I personally like the well water. There are some drawbacks to it, but I don't have to worry about anything getting into my water that could harm the fish before the water gets into the hatchery. Some of our other hatcheries derive water from like lakes and rivers, and there are all sorts of pathogens in those waters. You need to treat the water pretty heavily before you send it to your fish, or you can have some problems.
If I remember right, the other day I was in the other room and there's some big blue tanks there that kind of treat the well water.
Yep.
Are they adding, I'm sure, oxygen to it? What else do you have to do to it?
So those are the 2 things that I really have to worry about with my well water is making sure that there is enough oxygen because fish are breathing oxygen just like we are, just through a different medium, and then taking iron out. So those big blue tanks are iron filters and they are pulling excess iron out of my well water to make sure that it doesn't precipitate out and, give the fish iron poisoning. Okay. Oxygen, we get into the water in a pretty actually very easy, low cost way. We just make a waterfall. So the breaking up of the water and scattering it as it
Yeah.
falls will incorporate air into the water, and that will pull in oxygen.
If I open up one of the other mics, you can probably hear it in the background. There's water running all the time in
Oh, yeah.
here. So, you had a couple of interesting questions. I think Joseph asked, is there a listing on the DNR website of the lakes that are stocked with fry or fingerlings for walleye and northern pike, going by year or search by county? I don't know if there's a search by county, but I know Lake Finder is a great
Yes, I was
resource.
gonna say Lake Finder is the what we use in the DNR to basically report our stockings, and then that's accessible by the public to be able to see what we're doing and maybe find the right place to go fishing.
Yeah, I don't know if you can search. You might be able to search by county on there, but you can search by lake name. So if you
Yes.
have a lake by your house, or that you're maybe going fishing this weekend for the opener, you can look on there and find out what was stocked there, when, and all that. What
I'm
the survey
sure
was.
it will say, if you search by name, it will say which county. Can be a little tricky with some of the very common fish names. Like I can't even count how many long lakes we must have in the state.
There's a few.
So I know that there's also like a map too. So you can zoom out and then hopefully being able to get a bigger picture of the area that long lake in, maybe will tell you that it's specifically the one you want.
Julia, hi Julia, longtime listener, is scratching her head trying to figure out the viability and the math and the survival rates.
Great. Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit more.
It's a lot, and it was
Mhm.
when I was doing trout in the classroom too. It's like we would start each classroom out with like 300 eggs,
Mhm.
and we were considering they were doing very well if they had 100 to 150 of them at the end of the year. And this is in a small aquarium,
Right.
daily visits, daily maintenance by
Mhm.
the students in there. In the wild, that's 50% is huge.
Yeah, that would be exemplary. So there is a slight difference between viability and survival. So in the hatchery, when we're using the word viability, we're talking usually specifically about eggs. When I get the eggs into the hatchery, they all look the same. They'll all be that really pretty gold color. But just because they all look the same doesn't mean that, within the egg, they're all the same. Some eggs won't develop. Those are the inviable eggs. There could be many reasons that an egg is inviable. Maybe it was poor spawning conditions that day. Maybe there wasn't enough sperm, which the fisheries scientific term for fish sperm is milt. So maybe there wasn't enough milt, so it didn't get a sperm.
Yep.
Maybe it was bad milt from a bad male. Maybe it was a bad egg itself. So all of these factors could play into whether or not an egg develops, is viable. And that viability usually becomes apparent after 4 or 5 days in the hatchery. So these guys, all of the really nice gold eggs that I still have, I have not yet checked their viability. I'll do that either late this week or early next. And that number, that viability percent, can vary quite a bit between the jars. Sometimes we'll have had like a really good lot with really good eggs, lots of milt. It was a good spawning day. And that viability, all of those good eggs could be 95% of the total number in the jar.
Wow.
Sometimes it's a really bad day. Maybe it was a bad female. Maybe she's old. She's not making good eggs. Maybe there wasn't enough milt. Maybe it was just a really bad day to spawn. I've had viabilities as low as 8% of all of the eggs
Wow.
in the jar are viable. So that's when we're using the term viability. After that, it just becomes survival and mortality. So fish, sometimes can just die because, they get sick here or they're outcompeted for food. Muskie are so fun and they like to cannibalize each other. So that can also impact survival. We try to feed them a whole bunch so that they aren't eating each other. But sometimes you'll come in the morning and you'll see a muskie, what we call twin tails. He'll have a tail in the back and a tail coming out his mouth in the front.
And it always seems to be, I know in the aquariums at the schools, there's always one fish that's probably 1.5 times the size of most of the other ones.
Yeah, that's the little bugger that's eating everyone.
Yep. Julie had a question too. You talked to her about rearing ponds a little bit. She's wondering, how do you identify what a suitable rearing pond is? Are there key water habitat items or a certain amount of vegetation or?
Yeah. So some of our rearing ponds are effectively artificial outdoor ponds. We have some that are just directly managed either by a hatchery or by an area office. Those are ones that we can like manipulate the water level and drain it down and stuff like that. They're usually lined on the bottom with different materials. Excuse me. Excuse me. And those ones we just know are rearing ponds because they're ponds that we've built and dedicated to be rearing ponds. But some of the rearing ponds are just wild ponds, and they will have certain characteristics that will make them really, hopefully, good for raising fish. Usually, really low numbers of like sunfish. Sunfish are really strong fry and fingerling predators. So the fewer sunfish, the better. A good rearing pond will have like no sunfish like that. They'll have certain types of habitats that are really good for those tiny fish to, hide in and, be able to live in while they're growing to bigger sizes until they get to the point where they're no longer prey. A lot of those rearing ponds, we're kind of just identifying on a hunch, and it's really just our best educated guess. And those ones we're putting the fry in the spring, and then, basically, crossing our fingers that when we come back in the fall, they will have worked out essentially, and we'll be able to get a lot of fish back that have, grown to a fairly sizable size.
Listen, there's a lot of work. It always amazes me talking to the fisheries guys and gals that are out there doing this work. It's electroshocking, it's netting, it's surveying. There's a lot of hours that go into, sustaining our fisheries in Minnesota. So,
Absolutely.
Stefan was wondering, is there volunteer opportunities or job openings at the hatchery?
That is a good question. I do always get one summer help every single year. Usually that is a college age intern who will come in and help out, and it's always so welcome. I do also occasionally get people who will reach out to me saying that they want to help out in the hatchery, and I'm so glad to have those people as well. Because there's a lot of things to do back here that range from, like cleaning the eggs. We also quantify them. I've told you these numbers of 50 to 60,000 eggs. Thankfully, we don't have to count all of them by hand, but there is still a fair amount of labor that goes into quantifying how many eggs we have. And even just some other little things like cleaning, like we don't want to make this, like just leave this place to collect dust and grime. And so, we're always trying to make sure that cleaning gets done too. And so volunteers will ask to come and help out with things like that. And I'm always so thankful for that help. So yes, you can.
It's soon to be, Jen, I don't even know if you know yet, but Volunteer Impact is the DNR's volunteer software. So if you go on to volunteering platform at the DNR and Volunteer Impact, fisheries will soon be having stuff on there for next year at least. So Carol asked, what are you feeding the hatchlings?
Great. Yep. So like I said earlier, with the walleye, we're feeding them nothing. They get shipped out basically right when they hatch. But for the muskie, they are on a dry diet. It's actually quite a big industry making feed for hatchery fish. Dry diet is actually a relatively new invention. So it's just like a dry pellet. It's very stinky, usually like brown little they're like kind of shaped like chiclets, just like little, just little brown powder. And that size will change as the fish changes. Before dry diet, it used to all be wet diet, which was usually like frozen fish that you'd have to refrigerated fish or fish parts or, guts that you'd have to feed to the fish. And that was a lot more intensive. You usually have to have really big refrigerators for that. And it was very, very stinky. So it's the switch to dry diet has been much welcomed.
I bet. Actually, I was fishing out in Colorado a few years ago and in kind of a rearing pond at private property the guy had stocked. And the thing that worked the best is just a little brown pellet looking fly, because that's what they're getting fed all the time. So
they remember.
William was asking, I think you covered this a little bit, but
Mhm.
he's talking about a rearing pond up in Clearwater County
Mm-hmm.
that raises muskies, and the muskies are about 12 inches long when they're removed in the fall. What's the time frame for getting those fish up to that size?
12 inches. That would be the ones that I'm getting lots of pinks right now. Those are the ones that we are here right now. So in the fall, they'll get to about, 10, 12 would be a really big one in the fall. But now we're switching over to that overwintering and then getting them to 14. That's kind of eventually, hopefully we can get the whole program over to that 14 inches because like I said earlier, we do get just a lot more surviving.
Great. So if you have any other questions, please put them in there. Julie, of course, you're welcome for answering your questions. Like we're talking about, it's the walleye opener. So it's that time of year where everybody is, I actually just went in like last week because end of ice season was a little wonky. I always hate the end of ice season when I'm like, oh, I got to get my fishing license because March 1, I got to have a new license.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go out fishing then ice season in March this year. So I had to go in last week and get our license so we can get out. So get out there, get your license. This weekend is a big weekend for the Governor's Fishing Opener. It's the 77th annual Governor's Fishing Opener in Minnesota. So it's been going on for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
It's always a lot of fun, get out there and celebrate, the fishing industry and the outdoor industry in Minnesota. We have a lot of resorts. Like we said, a ton of lakes, a ton of streams in Minnesota. I think Commissioner Stroman said Minnesota is the 4th most populous state for actual people fishing.
I believe
If you
it.
count people that are out there fishing all the time. So
Everyone needs to go out and fish this weekend for me because I can't because I will be at the hatchery.
you'll be rearing fish.
Yes.
Taking care of
Fish
pigs.
don't care if it's Saturday or Memorial Day or Juneteenth or the 4th of July. They need to eat every day. And so somebody is here every day.
Yep. Somebody's got to take care of them. So yeah, get out this weekend. It's supposed to be just a beautiful weekend. So get out, fish if you get a chance. Take somebody new out there fishing. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we do have the Minnesota Moms Fishing Challenge happening this weekend. It starts on Friday, runs through Sunday. Take a picture, take your mom out fishing for Mother's Day. Happy Mom's Day to all the mothers out there.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a Minnesota resident, you can fish for free if you're a mom this weekend. So
Nice.
join that. Make your kids, your husband, your friends, or somebody take you out fishing, get some pictures, and enter that contest. It's a lot of fun. So I think that's all we have for questions. Is there any last closing statements you want to make? I can do one more pan around the room here a little bit. You see the eggs kind of behind Jen over there.
I don't think I have anything. Thank you all for joining in. If you have any more questions, you could feel free to direct them. I don't know how you guys normally get your questions fielded in, but if you send anything to Benji or the Moss crew, it will get it along to me and I will answer those.
Yeah. So if you have any other questions, we can get those to Jen and have her answer those for you. So I think with that, we'll end out a couple minutes early today. It's a nice day outside today. We had over 100 people still joining us, which is awesome. So thank you everybody for joining us today. We will see you next week. Have a safe and fun Governor's Fishing Opener. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.